Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Elisa. Let's get into it. For those of you who have been around since at least Christmas last year, you might remember that I did something that I called at the time the holiday season sewing pattern extravaganza. Yes, that's what it was called, which is where I created 5 sewing patterns in the run-up to Christmas. Don't worry, I'm not gonna do that this year because it was a little bit mad, but it was actually quite successful, and a lot of the sewing patterns that I made back then in December last year are still going very strong on my Etsy shop, which I'm very grateful for. There is one pattern in particular that I was super proud of back when I made it because it was something that really spoke to my personal aesthetic and something that I felt like was very current at the time, and I still feel like is very current right now, which is the Lola Dress. Some of you might remember her. The Lola Dress is currently not available on my Etsy shop, and that is because I wasn't 100% happy with the sleeve. The sleeve was fine. It was a fitted bellish sleeve with a elasticated shoulder, but I felt like it was a little bit too bulky in this area and not bulky enough in the cuff. We're gonna change that today, and from today onwards, the Lola Dress pattern is going to be available on my Etsy shop once more, which I know a lot of you are gonna be very happy about because you've been asking about it. Because the sleeve pattern has changed, we need to refilm the tutorial. The old one is still good, it still stands, you could still use that one, but if you've purchased the Lola Dress pattern in or after December 2024, this is the sewing pattern tutorial for you, because this is where I'm going to show you how to put together the updated sleeve. I've been working tirelessly on the sleeve. It looks so much better now. It still has the elasticated shoulder, but it is much more voluminous in the cuff, which I think looks so much nicer. As per usual, there's nothing new about this. The sewing pattern comes in sizes extra small to 3XL European. You can check out my sizing chart if you're not sure what that means. When you purchase it, you get 3 different kinds of PDF versions of it. You get European DIN A4, A0, which you can bring to your copy shop, and US letter. You will also receive a pattern introduction sheet, which explains everything about the pattern that you need to know. How to understand the pieces, how to cut them, what materials to use, what materials you need, what additions you need, and so on and so forth. All right, now let's get into it. I'm very excited. Alright, we're going to kick things off by sewing together our bodice. The bodice consists of 4 pattern pieces, which are eventually going to make up 7 individual pieces, which we now need to pin and sew together along the vertical seams. All of the vertical seams are straight except for the princess seam in the front, which is going to give our front bodice the shape that we need to accommodate our curves. So let's go. Always make sure to press your seams as you go along, and also do make sure that you give your seams the curve that they provide, especially in the front, because if you just iron over them flat, then you might lose that, so keep that in mind. So the bodice is sewn together. This is what it looks like on the outside. You have the front curves, you have the underarm sections right here where the sleeve is going to be inserted, and your back seams. And this is what it looks like on the inside. Beautiful. All of the seams are pressed open, and as you might be able to tell here, I have cut out some little wedges from the seam allowance in the curved bust area, because that helps it to retain its shape and keep nice and curvy as we want it to be. Up next, the sleeves. Here's just a little point on how I cut the seam allowance around this area of the sleeve, because it is a little special and not maybe super intuitive. This curve right here, which is also mirrored on the other side, is your armhole curve, and then this here is the tunnel for your elastic. And what you do is you cut 1 centimeter of seam allowance here, you cut 1 centimeter of seam allowance here, and this area doesn't need seam allowance. The first thing we need to do is to serge the shoulder curve. Okay, once the shoulder curve is serged and pressed and it lies nice and flat, what we can do is to create our tunnel. And for that, we simply fold it over by the 1 centimeter that we have as a guide here. You might want to snip it in just a little bit more so you have a little more space. And then I fold the tunnel over. and I start to pin it. And since this is a curve, you might want to use more pins than you normally would to be able to go all the way around. Always keep the same space, which should be 1 centimeter. Now, at some point, your fabric is gonna fight against you because it doesn't want to go around the curve. And the more you feel like that is the case, the more you can start to potentially put some pleats in. Since this is the inside of the sleeve, it is fine to have a pleat here and there as long as it helps you go around the curve. As this tunnel is eventually going to be ruffled up and ruched up and gathered up with elastic, you won't be able to see the pleats. So if every couple of centimeters around the apex of your shoulder you need a little pleat, that's totally okay. And again, use as many pins as you can because this is going to help you mold the fabric around the curve. Okay, fantastic. Once you're at this point, you can go and sew the tunnel down, sewing along the edge of your seam allowance right here. Always make sure you have at least 1 centimeter because this is important for your elastic later. Okay, so before we actually do the rest of the sleeve, we can already add our elastic in a preliminary way. This is a 0.6 millimeter wide elastic. Ideally, I would have wanted a 0.91, but I don't have enough, so this should do. This is quite sturdy, so this should be fine. And I would recommend cutting a piece that is roughly 45 centimeters, and that is just so that you have 2 pieces of elastic of the same amount. So when you later have to adjust things, you know how long they are. And it should be long enough for sure, but you can also cut it back in the fitting process, which we're not there yet, but almost. So grab a safety pin, insert it into your elastic, and good old sewing 101, you just insert the elastic into the tunnel that you've just made. You go, go, go. Once you're all the way through, or almost all the way through, make sure you secure the beginning of your elastic so it doesn't jump into your tunnel, and then you can keep going. Okay, we're through. Again, secure the elastic on this side as well. And now, identify what the front and the back of your sleeve is, because there is a front and a back. You can easily do that by looking at your cuff, and where the weight of the bell is your back. So for me, this would be my back side. And that means that I can secure the elastic permanently with a few stitches here. We do not secure the elastic permanently in the front, and that is because we need this to be still flexible for the fitting process. So there's a pin in the front and sewn down in the back. Now that we're at this point, we can place our right sides touching, and we can actually sew the sleeve inseam. Now I also immediately serge the seam, and I also serge all the way around my cuff because this is the next tunnel that we need to create. All right, now we can turn the cuff over by 1 centimeter, same as with the shoulder. Sew a tunnel and insert an elastic. The cuff is not straight, it has a bit of a curve to it as well. So again, as you've done with the shoulder, make sure that you use more pins than you usually maybe would, and that when you feel like you need a tiny little bit of a pleat, that's totally okay. Again, because that's on the inside, and this is going to be ruffled up with an elastic. Just one mention about the elastic for your cuff. You wrap it around your wrist and you will add probably 5 centimeters of ease. And that is because you need a little bit to overlap your elastic with each other. And then also this is going to be quite bulky because you have a lot of ease that you're going to gather up with the elastic. So it's nicer and more comfortable if you add a little bit more than you think you should. These are my 2 pieces for my cuffs. And again, as I've done with the shoulder, I just use a safety pin and insert the elastic this way. Once you're coming out the other side, carefully remove your safety pin. Grab the beginning of your elastic and overlap it with the end of your elastic. Secure it, and then you can take it to your sewing machine, and then you simply sew over it a bunch of times. There's no nice way to put it, just bulk it down. Make sure it's not coming apart. And with that, the prep of the sleeve is finished and it's ready to be joined with the rest of the bodice. Okay, exciting times. We have both sleeves prepared and we have our bodice sewn together, which means we can join the two. As I've mentioned previously, there is a front and a back to the sleeves. Now, ideally, you will have done as I've told you, which is that you have secured the elastic on the back side of your sleeve. so you can easily identify where it goes. You have a little armhole section in your bodice, and you start by placing your sleeve inseam onto the side seam of your bodice, and then you pin around the curve. You do the same thing in the front. You now go ahead and attach your sleeve, but be careful, only start after your tunnel. So you sew around this half moon shaped curve, and also don't sew over your elastic here. You want this to be loose for the fitting process. Hello, we have reached the fitting phase of the bodice. Here we are. This is what it looks like. It's nowhere near completed, but the shell is assembled. And we can now adjust our shoulder elastics. So right now, they fall off my shoulder. However, if you have done as I have instructed you to do, let me pin this here. You should now be able to remove the pin, hold on to your elastic, and pull it to adjust your strap. How good is that? And then once you feel like it's tight enough, you pin it. Again, like so. Now this is a fitted sleeve, this is an unfitted sleeve. Amazing. You could now either, if you, for example, have uneven shoulders like a lot of people have, you could now do the same thing on this side. Grab your elastic and pull it to adjust it. Or you simply do it on one sleeve, take it off, have a seat, and then compare the two elastics as they come out of the tunnel to make sure they're even, because you have two 45-centimeter long elastics. So both your shoulders are even. I've now adjusted both my shoulders, and then I will compare how much excess I have on my desk, and then if I feel like I want to even it out, I can, or maybe they're the same. Okay, so apart from that, you should have a look at your bodice as well. Have a look at how the curves sit on you. You do want to be able to breathe. Don't take it in too much, even though you might be tempted. I've done that in the past and it didn't serve me well. So I'm going to make sure that I have a little bit more wiggle room today than I've had in previous projects. However, if you, for example, feel like the armpit sits too high in your own armpit, you could lower the armhole a little bit, or you could work on the curve right here for your bust if you needed to. Make it more shallow, make it more deep. Also check your back and make sure that it's not gaping. All right, I'm super stoked about the fit. Let's move on. All right, since the top is now fully assembled, we can focus on the skirt. And the skirt works the same way as the top. It has vertical seams, and the general shape is a fit and flare. So you will find that the top is quite fitted and the bottom flares out. You have the center front cut on a fold, as we have also had in the bodice. So all I need to do now is to align all of my vertical seams with each other, pin, sew, and serge them. My back pieces are sewn together, my front pieces are sewn together, and now I can join front and back at the side seams to reveal the full skirt. All right, now that we have the top assembled as well as the skirt, we can join the two right sides touching. So I'm finding my waist and I'm placing it so that I have good access with the top right sides facing down. So skirt right side facing up, top right side facing down, and then I start to find and align all of my corresponding seams, because the vertical seams match up from the bodice to the skirt. Keep in mind that if you've changed anything, if you've made any adjustments, that you will have to carry those over to the top or bottom respectively to still make sure everything matches up. Okay, the waist is pinned and now I'll sew it down. All right, so we now have the shell totally assembled, completely done. You can see the construction of it quite nicely on the inside. I have serged the seams, the vertical seams in my skirt, but I have not serged them in the bodice because I'm going to line my bodice at a later point. Before we get to those final touches, we can go ahead and insert/baste a zipper into the center back. So we can try the dress once again, check the fit, and then move on to finishing touches. All right, to kick off the finishing touches, we need to insert a zipper, and that is so that we can try the dress and make sure that the fit is right. I've got this 56cm long zipper here, which is invisible. It's meant to be invisible once installed. So what I need to do is I place this face down, so right side facing the right side of my shell, and I start pinning it on one side first. Once you've pasted the zipper in, now is a very good moment to try the dress once again. You want to make sure that there's no gaping in the back. You could take the dress in the princess seams in the back, as I have done. I've taken it in about roughly 1 centimeter on each side because I felt like there was a bit of gaping going on. And don't forget that right now the zipper is just basted, so you can see that it is quite visible. I'm now going to go in and sew closer to the zipper teeth so that it's fully hidden, and that also means that we're going to lose even a little bit more width in the back. So don't get over ambitious in the back if it feels like it's a little wide. Maybe you want to base the zipper in first before you take it in anywhere else. So that means I'm now opening the zipper back up again, taking a zipper foot, and I'm sewing in the ditch right here. Last but not least, reach inside the dress and turn it inside out, because you now want to close the rest of your center back in the skirt area because it's still open at this point. So simply fold it right sides touching as you normally would when you close a seam. And now you can start at the base of your zipper and sew down the center back. I then serge the two sides of my seam allowance individually and press the seam open. Something I've done off camera, but it is pretty straightforward, so I don't think I need to explain too much, is that I have created a copy of the dress in lining material, and I've made it a mini length so that I can now nicely overturn the lining with the shell to have a clean inside. The pattern actually has a marker in the skirt for a mini length, so you could actually even use that for your shell material. You could make a mini Lola if you so wanted to. And this is the result of that. It's just inside out. And now I'm going to use this to overturn my dress by placing it right sides touching. And as I always do, I now place all of my vertical seams on top of each other so that they align in the shell and in the lining, and I pin along the neckline. When we come to the sleeves, what you want to do is fold the sleeve down and inside in between the shell and the lining. You also want to nip your seam allowance in your sleeve, so that would be the seam allowance that connects the tunnel to the rest. So at the end of your tunnel, just nip the seam allowance down to the seam like this. This gives you a bit of wiggle room and releases the tension. And now what you want to do is you want to make sure you sew over this area so there's no hole on the outside, but you can nicely pivot the elastic like this so that eventually it's not convoluted and it's not looking like this, because without the seam allowance nipped it would look up like that. With it you can fold it down, so eventually it's going to look up. So I would recommend pinning the sleeve tunnel down to make sure it faces the right way and it stays that way. And then the rest of the armhole you just pin along because it's a replica in the lining and in the shell. And you do the same thing in the back, just nip your seam allowance right under the tunnel so that you can fold the tunnel a little bit more like this. If you were to go with facing instead of lining, the procedure would be exactly the same, just that your facing piece would be much smaller. It would be just a probably 5 to 6 centimeter strip equidistant to your neckline, but you would still overturn your neckline the way I do here right now. Now I take this to my sewing machine. I sew from the shell side so that I can see my original seam in the armhole, and attach my lining. Once the lining is attached, we need to nip the seam allowance, especially in the armhole. You want to make sure that this can overturn nicely once turned over to the other side. I'm even going to cut it back a little, and then I will also cut these little wedges into the seam allowance in my neckline, because the neckline is slightly curved, and this is going to make sure there's no bulk once everything is turned around. Okay, now let's turn this around and have a look. What's particularly important is that the tunnels are nicely sewn in and they don't come out of your seam, which they're all in. right, the lining is in, but we still need to understitch it. However, I want to give the dress a little bit of razzle dazzle, so I got this haberdashery right here, which is just a tiny little embroidery that is actually elasticated, so I gotta be careful I'm not twisting and turning it. And what I'm doing is, ideally, I will separate the seam allowance and the shell like I normally would to understitch it, and then I'm gonna put this onto that seam. So when I then turn it over, you can only see a tiny little bit of it. To actually make that happen, I think I will have to pin it quite rigorously so it's not moving around and I get a clean, nice result. So that's gonna take a moment. If I can have another moment of your time. And the very, very last step is to do your hem. I have serged my hem to get a clean, frayless finish. And now I'm going to fold it over by about 1 centimeter and stitch it down, give it a press, and then we're done. So this is what the dress looks like. Say, I'm reading on a chapter, babe. Been stuck here in a bed for days. I've been staring at